Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Satsunami. I'm Satsunami, and joining me to finish the fight is my very good friend, my Spartan in arms, the person who is probably cursing me for dragging him kicking and screaming into Halo Month, is my very good friend, Adam. Adam, are you ready to finish the fight?
Hello, I am indeed. It's been a long month. It's been a trying month at some points, but we're here at the culmination, and I'm very excited.
I cannot wait for this episode. We have been talking a lot about this episode ever since the beginning, really, of Halo Month. We have been through quite the spectrum of emotions. Would that be right in saying with this topic?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's been ups, there's been downs, there's been bits in the middle where we go, we've had everything really.
So like a Halo game.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
So yeah, we have talked about really just a wide range of topics on the Halo franchise. We have talked about Halo Infinite, which of course came out in, 2021. I keep forgetting it is 2022, if I'm honest. We have talked about Halo trivia and all the wonderful facts, which I'm sure you loved that episode, Adam.
I did. I learnt so much. I came away a very different man to the one who who started the episode.
Tell me, Adam, was it blinding? The knowledge.
I learned a lot about methane, I feel like.
Yes, if you want to find our new podcast, it is at profitoftruthpodcast.com. Nah, I'm only kidding, please don't look it up. And of course, for our last episode on Halo, we touched on the anime series Halo Legends, which, not gonna lie, was a bit of a weird one. We had to rope our friend Greenshield95, who is a anime aficionado, and yeah, that's the reason he's not on this episode, because I think he went away and decided to cry in a corner or a very dark room after that episode. But you loved it, didn't you, Adam?
Yeah, I did. As I say, I stand by it. I thought it was the best anime that I've had to watch so far.
I know, better than Studio Ghibli, better than Toei Animation. Well, no, Toei Animation was in that. Scratch that. The joke is ruined.
Better than Death Note, anyway.
Oh, controversial. True, but controversial.
Go watch Death Note and then Halo Legends and tell me that I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I must admit, I can't argue with those facts. Today we are going to be doing a very similar thing to something we did a couple of weeks ago. Well, I say a couple of weeks ago, probably months ago. That, of course, being we tackled the Call of Duty franchise in a very similar way with an episode entitled The State of Call of Duty. So if you haven't checked out that podcast episode, please feel free. You can pause this one, go check it out, and then come back. We'll still be waiting. Come on, go. And yeah, today we are going to be talking indeed about the state of Halo. Now, before we dive into this, our long-term listeners, you will know pretty much our attachment to the series. Is that right in saying, Adam, that we are both fans of Halo?
Definitely. I mean, maybe to varying degrees. We may be in different places with our fandom of the series now, but I definitely think we can both be classed as quote-unquote fans.
Oh, no, absolutely. Because you started with the OG Combat Evolved, which is quite possibly one of the better games of the series. It's definitely classed as one of the better games.
I would certainly argue it still is the best of the series, although there's a heavy dose of nostalgia laced and dripping over my comment there. So you can take that for what it is, but to me it'll always be the best.
Because while you started with Halo Combat Evolved, I started with, of course, Halo 3, which, diving into the series as a new player, Halo 3 is just a flustercluck of who's the Covenant? Why are the monkeys trying to batter my brains in with a warhammer? Why are these jackals sniping me? It's a loaded game filled with loaded questions, but at the same time it was a game I had a lot of fun with. I watched a lot of videos on Halo. I really got attached to the franchise through Halo 3, through my kind of nostalgic memories with playing with friends. Of course, this was my very first game that I ever played with people online, so Halo 3 definitely holds a special place to me. But would it be right in saying, Adam, that Halo has, to coin a phrase from the first one, the combat has evolved?
It's an interesting question, because some people would argue that the combat has to an extent de-evolved
Yeah.
from what it was, in the way that when the series first started, it implemented lots of new ideas and concepts that became staples of the FPS genre and actually changed, were actually quite radical changes to the established genre. But over time, and especially when a new studio came to helm Halo, a lot of those things kind of fell away, and I'm sure we'll get into that in more details. It's an interesting question because with the latest entry, you could maybe argue it's kind of come back again. The combat evolved, then it de-evolved, and now it's re-evolved again. I'm sure we'll dive far more into this.
It's a franchise that definitely is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, but I feel as if at the same time, it's not the franchise that people fell in love with. There is a very specific reason for that, mainly because the stewardship of the Halo franchise passed over from Bungie Studios, who were, the creators of the game, and onto 343 Industries, who, there's opinions, there's definitely opinions on how they've taken the franchise, whether their involvement is a positive influence or they're like that kid behind, honestly, it sounds as if I'm comparing it to those 80s coming of age films. Like The Breakfast Club, it's like 343 Industries are like that creepy kid behind the bike sheds who's like, come on, take a smoke. It's gonna be fine. Have you heard about the Didact? Come on.
Oh, no. I thought you were going to say there was the weird kid who by the end of the film gets a makeover from the pretty girl and is like, wow, you were hot this whole time. I never knew.
You know what? That's probably the better analogy here. So much potential, which we will come into, but yeah, there's so much potential that 343 Industries has, and there have been mixed opinions, I will say. I keep reiterating mixed opinions, but I just want to reiterate, before we go in, head first into this episode, before we ODST drop in, apologies, Adam, I should have given you a warning before I brought up the ODST.
I'm getting a migraine.
Yeah, before we jump in, I don't want to give the impression that this is just going to be a Bungie circle jerk, that Bungie can do nothing wrong and their tenure is like the golden child of FPS games and things, but we're going to try and tackle this very fairly. I say that, but I get the feeling I'm probably going to be a little bit biased, What can I say? Sue me. But actually, no. For legal reasons, do not sue me, please.
The bold statement to start the episode off. Sue me, I don't even care.
I don't even care anymore. What you gonna do, Spotify? Oh, no. I won't even go there. Yeah. Will we jump into this? Will we jump in and give I was about to say 2 cents, but I forget we're not American. So our 2 pence.
Our 2 whole pence.
Yes, our 2 Halo rings on this opinion. I don't know. I don't know enough about the lore to know what Forerunners actually use. So will we jump into it?
Let's do it. I've got my armor lock on, so let's do it.
And of course, as always, we will be right back after these transmissions. Welcome to Satsunami, a variety podcast that talks about topics from gaming and films to streaming and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we discussed Game of the Decade, Deadly Premonition, the romantic thriller Birdemic, and listen to us get all sappy as we discuss our top 5 Christmas films.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and all good podcast apps. As always, stay safe,
stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
We are Beer and Chill Podcast.
Podcast where we review TV shows, games, movies, and whatever else takes our fancy.
So what are you waiting for? If you're a cool kid like us, you're gonna listen to the Beer and Chill Podcast. You can get it anywhere from Spotify all the way to your grandmother's radio. My name is Jan.
And I'm Craigie C.
And we are
Beer and Chill.
And we are back. So Adam, let's take a stroll down memory lane. The year is 2001 and Halo Combat Evolved has just come out. Now, is it safe to say that Halo Combat Evolved was, quite frankly, one of the most revolutionary FPSs at the time?
I think without question. I think this game, quite simply, is a masterpiece. I think it's a landmark title in the FPS genre, and I don't think you can tell the story of gaming without at least referencing Halo Combat Evolved. It's so important, I think, for three particular reasons. Number one, and most obviously, this is the game that kickstarted this whole Halo franchise. Since then, we've had numerous games, books, anime. There's going to be a TV show. It's spun off. I think it's a $1 billion franchise now. I think. Also, as well, this is the game that made the Xbox successful. Again, this is maybe counterfactual, and we'll probably never know for certain, but without something like Halo, there's a good chance the Xbox could have been a one-and-done console. Microsoft might have just cut their losses and said, oh, well, we tried, didn't work out, and just left the console space, so we'd have a very different gaming sphere than we have now. And thirdly, as I said, you were correct in saying, it revolutionized first-person shooter games, especially on the console. This really was the game that showed that an FPS could work, and could work well on a console. And that's no disrespect to things like GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. And those games were great for their time. But I would really stress for their time, I do not think they've aged well. Their control schemes certainly have not. They were working with working with a severe handicap in the N64 controller's layout. But Halo was able to use the twin stick controller for the original Xbox, and Bungie refined it and tightened the controls up, added new innovations such as regenerating health, a 2-weapon limit, levels that focused on verticality, all that played into this, you'd argue, more restrictive control scheme than mouse and PC. And this was the game that really made FPS is popular on consoles, and it's a genre that remains, I think maybe the highest grossing genre on consoles to this day, and Halo has a large part to play in that, so I think revolutionary is the exact word to use to describe this game.
It's quite interesting that you bring up other titans of FPS games. If you think of other games like Call of Duty, GoldenEye especially, let's focus on that one, because GoldenEye is one of those ones that whenever you talk about FPS games, it is so difficult to get around the conversation without mentioning GoldenEye and how rare we are at the time. I know they're rare. Yeah, thank you, Microsoft. It's amazing to see how that was so revolutionary. And again, harkening on your point, for the time, because I remember years ago I dug out my old Nintendo 64 and I played GoldenEye with my friend. He didn't grow up with an N64, so with me bringing him into that experience for the first time, he did not enjoy GoldenEye at all, and it was like, the controls are bad, the graphics obviously weren't the greatest, and obviously for the time it was revolutionary, but nowadays it's kind of like, well, it's definitely dated, a bit like Doom. Doom still holds up, but not compared to some of the games that you kind of get nowadays. But I feel as if with Halo, and especially now that they've remastered it, the controls have always felt very similar compared to the new games. It's like you can go back to Halo and you can still get a relatively similar experience. Would that be right in saying?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it shows how good those initial controls were, because as you say rightly, they've not really changed all that much. In the intervening games, no matter the fact that we're 20 years, so we're over 20 years now removed from when Halo Combat Evolved first released. And as well, if you look to see how many subsequent FPS games, from different series copied from Halo, regenerating health has become the standard now for basically all first-person shooters. It's rare to see some like bar health now in those games. A 2-weapon limit as well is now the standard. It was just such a tight control scheme, and they did a lot. Bungie did a lot to compensate for the fact that you were working with a controller, so you didn't have the kind of pinpoint accuracy that you could get with a mouse and keyboard. So there was a bit more of a generous auto aim, and as I said, the game was designed around this quote unquote limitation. But they did it so well, and they showed how viable it was that it did set a standard that the subsequent games didn't need to improve upon that core gameplay from Halo Combat Evolved because it was so good. I totally agree. I think it still is. Whether you think Halo Combat Evolved is playable, now I know we have a mutual friend who tried playing it and didn't have a particularly good experience with it, but I don't think that's anything to do with how it plays, whereas something like GoldenEye, I think a lot of that is, as you say, how the game plays. I think Halo is just as playable now because of that core, the kind of solid gameplay at its foundation.
And I mean, going back to like play the games with like yourself, with our mutual friend, who I'm not going to name and shame on the episode, but if you're listening, hello there. Yeah, we played through Halo Combat Evolved together. Well, you and I in particular, we played through Halo Combat Evolved. Our mutual friend and I played through Halo 2, and of course, I myself. In fact, all three of us actually played through Halo 3, didn't we? That was actually one of the first co-streams that I ever did on my Twitch channel.
It was our first proper whole playthrough of a game.
And if you actually want to see like what that was like, yeah, you can see it on our YouTube channel at Satsunami42. It is chaos. Beautiful, beautiful chaos, but chaos nonetheless. But that's the thing though, if you watch back that video, you can see how much fun we were all having. You know, we were joking around with each other. And I know technically, you know, that was the Master Chief Collection we were playing it on, but it's really the same game. Maybe with a few tweaks, but it's the same, isn't it?
It's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same foundations. It certainly did tweak it. I think certainly visually, obviously, it's been upgraded because it's based off the anniversary edition that was released for Xbox 360. I think in 2011, 10 years afterwards. But from what I understand, it is basically the same game. You know, I'm sure there'll be some tweaks in it there. I don't know how much that's changed it, but yeah, basically the same.
And it's amazing to think that Bungie, they were the forerunners, essentially, of their own franchise, where they looked after it for 9 years. Would you believe that? So they started in 2001, and then their final game was Halo Reach, which is quite a kind of poignant swan song, considering what happens in that game. And that was in 2010 that came out.
Goodness me, there you go. 12 years now? Bloody hell.
It is, isn't it? It's so weird to think, because I remember getting Halo Reach for Christmas, because I wasn't sure about the Halo franchise. If I'm honest, like, this is me putting my cards on the table here. After playing Halo 3, I didn't love it. Like, I played the campaign and I thought that was okay, because at that point I'd been playing a lot of Call of Duty games, so I was comparing it to that. I was like, why can't I run? All these kind of nitpicks, which in hindsight isn't really that important, but I wasn't a major fan of Halo 3. I thought it was good, but I just didn't think it was that great. And it wasn't until Halo Reach that I did start to appreciate the game, and I definitely put a lot more hours, I think, into Halo Reach as opposed to 3, or maybe they were balanced. But out of curiosity, what is your kind of general impression of this era of Halo?
It's funny because the Bungie era, I think, is clearly the peak of Halo. This is when it was at its height of pop culture, of popularity. You only got to look back at the launches for Halo 2 and Halo 3 to see how hyped they were. And I think Halo 2, its initial sales rivaled, the film releases of that time. I think 2004, it was a huge event. Jimmy Kimmel made his infamous joke. If people know Jimmy Kimmel's one of these late night hosts in America, had his infamous comment about lots of people leaving their parents' basements to go and buy this game, buy Halo 2. Yeah, so it was a huge event, and it was lines around the corner to get it and stuff, in a way that the releases of modern Halo games haven't really had. I mean, of course, things have changed now, is it? Because we buy games mostly digitally now rather than a box copy. But as well, like, the hype hasn't been to the same levels that it was. For me personally, I didn't really know a lot about Halo Combat Evolved. So when I got my Xbox, I'd heard of it because it was obviously the title. It was, it was a launch title, and it was the title that most people got when they got an Xbox. So when I bought my Xbox, I originally bought it with part of a racing game bundle. So it was supposed to come with like 4 racing games and one of the steering wheels. But I can't remember how, but somehow managed to talk the people in what was then, I think, Electronic Boutique, now Game, into switching out one of the racing titles to put Halo in. And that's where I fell in love with this game. And it's still one of my favorite games of all time, and I absolutely adore it. As I say, I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's so important. But it's funny because I'm such a fan of that game, but I don't know how much of a fan of the series I am. Because I was very excited for Halo 2, and I remember getting it on launch and everything, and I thought it was fine, but it didn't grab me in the way that Halo 1 did. And I know there is a lot of disappointment about Halo 2, because especially with the sort of marketing material that was released at the time, which Bungie had to scrap its kind of initial demo and plans for it. They were trying to build a new game engine, but they couldn't get it to work, so they had to kind of go back to the drawing board quite late into the development cycle. So a lot of kind of promises were sort of broken with it. But I was far more interested in games like the original Star Wars Battlefront that came out at the same time as Halo, and I kind of fell away. And I got Halo 3 as well, but I just found Halo 3 a bit disappointing as well. I don't know, it it just kind of, I was like, oh, it just feels like a bit of a lackluster ending to this trilogy, and I kind of fell away from it. I didn't get Reach on launch, and it wasn't really until Halo 4 that I kind of came back into the series, but even then, not with any particular passion. So I don't know, it's funny because it's definitely the 9 years of Bungie's stewardship is definitely the height of the game's popularity, but I don't know, for me, it was that first game, and then I just kind of fell away from it.
For me as well, I definitely agree with you. I think that Halo 3 was very disappointing, personally. Well, not disappointing, sorry, no. Let me rewind there before I get shanked. I think that Halo 3 was just quite confusing, and I know that sounds like ridiculous. You know, it's like watching Return of the King, let's say, and be like, who's Frodo? Who's this? You know? I remember going in, and I love like campaigns in FPS games. They can be terrible, they can be great, as long as they've got like a gripping hook. And the reason I got into it, there's actually a lot of reasons, but I think the main ones was because Halo was so popular at the time, but I never grew up with an Xbox. I had a GameCube. My brothers, they had the PlayStation, and I never had an original Xbox. So my first Xbox was the 360, and I didn't get that until much, much later. I think probably long after Halo 3 had actually come out. It's kind of like the opposite for you, because I remember you, Adam, you got like a PlayStation, is that right? You got a PlayStation after the Xbox?
Yeah, I have a PlayStation 2 and a PlayStation 3, but I got those like years after their initial launches.
Because I got the PlayStation 3 before, because my brother had the PlayStation 2, so it only felt natural to get the PlayStation 3, but that meant, of course, I couldn't play Halo, but I was kind of like, okay, whatever. But then all my friends started playing the Xbox, so Santa was very good to me a couple of years later and gave me a Xbox 360, so lucky me, I got the chance to play it. And I think one of my very first games that I got for it was Modern Warfare 2. Oh man, what a game. Like, Modern Warfare 2 is a fantastic FPS game, but I ended up getting the Halo 3, I think it was like a pre-owned copy I got, and I got it, I played it, and I thought, this is okay, you know. I think it's because I wasn't attached to the series. I didn't grow up with it. It's a bit like Zelda for me. Zelda, objectively, great series and everything, but I've got no emotional attachment. And at the time, I had no emotional attachment to Halo 3. So I was kind of like, do I really like this game? Is it just, you know, it's not for me kind of thing? You know, a lot of existential questions for a game that's about shooting aliens and firing off genocidal wedding rings. But the point remains, it was kind of underwhelming. Then I played ODST and I didn't mind it. It wasn't, like, let me reiterate here for the record, Your Honour, I didn't think it was the best Halo experience. Looking back on it now, it definitely isn't. But it was interesting to see Halo try to flesh out its world. And I think it wasn't the best example of it, but it was that kind of gateway into seeing what Halo was capable of. And by the time I got Halo Reach, like, I was blown away by Halo Reach. The fact that you could create your own Spartan, the fact that you could be the hero, or, well, I say hero, the inevitable martyr, as it were. This is kind of something that I have noticed about Bungie as a whole, because, as I said, I went back years later to play Halo 1 and 2. They have a terrible problem with storytelling, and I think it's like a hangover from their first game, because I'm quite curious to hear what you think about Bungie's storytelling, but I feel as if their priority, rightfully so, but their priority is make a fun game first, and then kind of attach the story around that. So it almost feels as if, it's something you've brought up before, I think, in the past, where you say you like games, is that correct? You like games where, you know, if it's an FPS game, you like to be a soldier character that's part of like a bigger conflict. And that's almost what it feels like with the original games. It's like the Master Chief isn't the sole saviour of humanity. Well, at least not at this point. He technically does save humanity, but it's not as apparent as what's to come later. And don't worry, we will get on to that, but like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I do like to be a part of. I think it depends on a lot of what the game is. Certainly for something like a Call of Duty or like a Battlefield, I like to be, you know, a cog in the machine. I like to be part of something. Like I could see something bigger happening around me, but you know, I'm playing an important part in it. But then again, with other games, your old Medal of Honor is used to be you were the lone soldier, you know, taking down the German war machine, and I was all down for that as well. So I think it kind of depends on the tone the game's going for, and I think Halo kind of got a good blend of that, because there was a point where the Master Chief was the sole savior and the lone hero who could stand up for humanity, but also a point, you were fighting alongside Marines and your other allies in these big battles. So I think that Halo, the original Halo, and 2 as well, and 3 Bungie ones struck a good chord between those two elements. In regards to Bungie's storytelling, yeah, I think they were at their best when they made a rather simple story. The first Halo has a relatively straightforward one. There certainly are some points where it maybe does get a bit too complicated, and there certainly are some plot holes. And if you look at it, you kind of think, that doesn't quite make sense. But I think overall it's a relatively simple story. I liked what they did in Halo 2 in fleshing out the Covenant a bit more. It was nice to kind of see a bit more of this faction and, its makeup and how the different races work together and some of its politics and what they're actually trying to do as well, a bit more into that, the kind of their religious belief in starting the Great Journey. I think it does get a bit more complicated, it does get a bit overly complicated in Halo 2, unfortunately, with some things. And I think with 3, I don't know, with Halo 3, it wasn't that the story was complicated or anything, I just kind of felt it was a bit ugh. It's that way of, I get that it's difficult to finish, it's that way, it's difficult to finish a trilogy, and this Halo is not the only example by any means in media of a kind of lackluster ending. We all remember the final season of Game of Thrones. Mass Effect 3 is notorious for its ending, so it can be difficult to finish a trilogy. So I don't know, it just didn't have that much impact. So again, I would agree with you, story I don't think is maybe Bungie's strongest point. There are good elements. I think Reach, again, I think the thing with Reach is, for me, it's more the theme, it's more its thematic elements rather than the actual story. I think the actual story itself is kind of ho-hum, but the kind of theme that it's working over, that desperate last stand, against hopeless odds, is what really makes that game great. And ODST tried something interesting, by having this squad and fleshing it out and everything. I just don't think they quite pulled it off in terms of story. So I think Bungie are okay with story, but again, I don't know if it's not their main focus or it's just not their strength. But yeah, I agree. They're not the best when you think of great video game storytelling studios. I don't think Bungie are there at the top.
As much as we can criticise a series like Call of Duty, for example, for their very linear storytelling, at least there's kind of a point A, point B. And there is for Halo, don't get me wrong, but it almost feels as if they started leaning into this kind of characterization of Master Chief being as I said, the saviour of mankind and everything. They didn't do it to ridiculous lengths. They still kept that human element of him helping the Marines and things like that. For Halo Reach, though, I've always thought that Halo Reach has a very rushed story. I love Halo Reach. I think it's one of my favourite games, but I do think the story is quite rushed. It's you go to explore the planet and then all of a sudden, oh, Covenant, let's go to war. You're like, oh, okay. And you have to, gather your forces and things. And it is quite fast-paced, but I do think they try to make it more of an experience. I think that's kind of the point that separates it from something like 343. And before we go on to 343, it is almost like Bungie. So I'm going to bring it back to ODST as an example, and apologies, Adam, but I got to do it. I got to say something nice about Halo ODST. Are you okay with me saying that?
I'm fine with you saying that. If you'll let me have my little piece at the end.
Oh, absolutely. One thing I want to compared to Halo, well, technically Halo 2 does this, but I think it's only the anniversary edition. Could be wrong in this. For 343, they have this weird heavy emphasis on lore, the backstory of everything. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for it, absolutely. But with Halo, I think ODST did something really interesting where they've got actually two stories going on. So the first story, of course, you're at ODST called Rookie, who gets knocked out. He has to explore the city. And we have discussed this in past episodes that it doesn't work that well. Stealth in a Halo game isn't that great. But something that I have to admit does work is if you go around the city, you can find these terminals, which tells the story about the civilian trying to, escape New Mombasa. And she is, she's got her own things going on. The fact is, you don't have to find these terminals. You can play the game and enjoy it for what it is. Whereas for the newer games, it almost feels as if it's necessary reading. Again, we'll kind of expand upon that later, but I felt it was like a nice touch, if you know what I mean. It was quite nice to see them add that like new bit of lore. Sorry, I'll let you say your piece now, because I've ranted on about that.
I honestly can't disagree with anything you said, and I think it is I think that is one of the strengths of ODST, is having that kind of underlying narrative, and it gives you a reason to, maybe go back to the game and explore as well. So I do think that is a really good strength of the game. I just wanted this little bit of time, because old school fans of Chatsunami, and also of your streaming, may know my quote unquote storied history with ODST, and that this is the migraine game. This is the game that gave me a splitting headache, the one that I've dismissed previously as a blatant cash grab DLC that was charged full price, one that I've just completely written off as the worst of the series. I've had a little bit of a a change of heart on this game. It's still not my favorite, but I kind of admire what it's trying to do. I think it had some really interesting ideas and some really interesting kind of gameplay concepts. I just don't think they were implemented very well. And I think that's partly because this did start off life as DLC that was then kind of grew in scope and scale and got turned into a full game. So it didn't have the most time in development. And I think if it had more time, I think it could have actually been a really, really good game. But, looking at it, I like the idea of getting away from the Spartan perspective and having this kind of, not that the ODST are average grunts, but more like your kind of average soldier perspective, and maybe putting some fear back into the Covenant. And even this idea of kind of exploring this abandoned city, it's a really kind of cool environment in many ways, with this almost noirish soundtrack. It's something very different, and it's quite cool, and the flashback structure is interesting, I think. I just don't think it was implemented properly, which is a real shame. So again, it's still not my favorite game by any stretch, but I have had a little bit of a change of heart. So I will no longer look at ODST with disdain. I'll look at it with a little bit of sadness that it didn't quite reach its full potential.
Yes, if you want to leave like a hallelujah comment on Twitter and Instagram.
Praise be to Bungie. I have been saved.
I totally get what you mean. You can even look back on the marketing of something like Halo 3, which I think is a perfect example of what ODST wanted to achieve. So for Halo 3, there was like a lot of, marketing where it was like believe, and that advert, don't you? Where it was like the diorama of Master Chief in the middle of like the field, and it's like all the soldiers trying to run away, and it's like the kind of minis.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember it.
And then it's like he looks up at the end and it just says like believe. And honestly, like I think the marketing for Halo 3 is probably one of the best in gaming. And I don't mean that in like a kind of hyperbolic way. I genuinely think that it is some of the best marketing. Because one of the other things they did, and this is like why a lot of people wanted a live action film, was because they had like a lot of live action adverts. So it was like Marines who were like looking back in the Covenant War. They were showing you like the brute shots. They were showing you, the Needler and everything. And they were talking about how the Master Chief saved them. And, they had like videos of like the ODSTs and like full gear trying to fight off the Covenant. It was so cool. And one thing I want to point out before we move on is the role of Machinima. Now, did you watch a lot of Machinima when you were younger?
I didn't, no.
So, to kind of briefly explain what Machinima is, it's basically like, is it right in saying like movies and TV shows, but like made through video games?
Yeah, I think that was their staple, wasn't it? Yeah.
Because I don't know if the company themselves, because there is a YouTube channel called Machinima, they used to produce all of these shows, and actually one of the shows that I absolutely loved growing up was one called Arby and the Chief, and I have brought this up to you loads of times, Adam, so apologies, but like Arby and the Chief was one of those shows where it was a guy who literally had a Master Chief model, an Arbiter model, and it was just like their kind of hijinks in this guy's apartment, with the Master Chief being like the stereotypical dude bro who was like, Halo's the best game of all time, and Arbiter being like the straight man to the group and everything. It was, I mean, the humour is kind of touch and go at times, especially by today's standards, but I mean, it was entertaining, and it really like interested me in this kind of, community of Halo. And it's the same with things like Red versus Blue. There's like a whole host of other Machinimas, and that's the amazing thing. Like, as far as I remember, Machinimas like for Halo kept going on up until about Halo Reach, and I think Red versus Blue still goes on to this day, and I think a few others must have gone on. But I think its height was probably around this time, and I think that's what helped kind of solidify Bungie's position as, I don't want to be like say the rightful rulers, but do you think that's kind of what solidified their place as like the more favourable studio?
I definitely think so. I think the Halo community was definitely at its height, especially by the time of Halo 3. I definitely think things like Machinima had a big part to play in that. I think as well, was it Halo 3 was the first time Forge mode came in, I think if I'm right saying, so there was lots of people had lots of chance to create their own maps. And I think the community was just at such a height there. There was so many opportunities for people to get involved with everything that, but definitely things like Machinima definitely played a big part in that, in putting Halo into the popular culture, and as you say, it remained there for a long time and still does to a lesser extent now. But certainly at that time, Halo was one of the biggest video game series of that time, without a doubt, in those years.
On that kind of bittersweet note, will we move on to the rather infamous
The awkward phase.
Yeah, pretty much the get out my room, mum, it's not a phase phase. So this began in about 2012. So as we said before, Halo kind of ended in 2010 with Bungie's studios deciding to relinquish I don't know if they relinquished it or they just, because I think they wanted to develop Destiny. Is that right in saying?
Yeah, so the story is that Bungie basically wanted to get out from under Microsoft. I think they'd had their fill of being part of Microsoft and kind of had their bit of fill of making Halo games by kind of 2007. So Microsoft made a deal with them that said Bungie would get their full autonomy if they developed two more. This is after Halo 3. If they get their full autonomy, if they develop two more Halo games, and then also signed over the rights to the Halo franchise to Microsoft. So Bungie were quite happy to do that. So obviously ODST came out, then Reach, and then that was it. And then Microsoft got the rights to the Halo franchise, and Bungie went off to join Activision, I think. I don't know if they're still part of Activision, because ironically they'll come back to Microsoft now, thanks to if that's the case. I don't know, maybe they are an independent studio now, but went to partner with Activision to make Destiny, as you say.
And of course, between 2010 and 2012, we really didn't get much in the way of content. I mean, we had Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary Edition. That is still pretty impressive, but at the same time, there wasn't really anything new, if that makes sense. And I don't want to downplay like all the work that went in for the Combat Evolved Anniversary Edition. I don't want to be like, oh yeah, we've seen that. But you know what I mean? There wasn't really anything new other than, of course, Halo Legends. Yeah, check out our last episode for that. But in November of 2012, Halo 4 came out. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, myself included, to see what would come next in this trilogy. And those are the noises of a man in fear of what was to come, because I played through Halo 4. I remember playing through it. The only thing I will say, I'm going to start off with a positive. I think that 343 did the gameplay of the Halo series better. And that might be a bold statement, but I genuinely think compared to like Reach and, the originals, but you can kind of give them leeway a little bit. It was like a developing franchise. And as you said, they wanted rid of the franchise. They probably just wanted rid of it. And they're like, yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fiddle about with it. In terms of storytelling, do you want to explain what the kind of issue is with storytelling in the 343 tenure?
Halo 4 is an interesting one to me. I think the general problem with 343 storytelling is that they started to include much more of the expanded lore of the Halo universe, which in a way Bungie had never really engaged with and kind of kept it at arm's distance, which you might argue was probably the right decision to make because things became quite cluttered in the 343 games. I think one thing that kind of worked a little bit against 343 is if you think about the end of Halo 3, by the end of Halo 3, the Covenant had been defeated, the Flood have also been defeated and eradicated, so there wasn't really, if they were going to make more games, you kind of needed to find a new enemy. So the Covenant are gone, the Flood are gone. Who's the only kind of existing people who are left? It was the Forerunners. They wanted to obviously try and stay in the existing kind of canon, so they kind of got pushed down that lane. And unfortunately, by getting pushed down that lane, you have to engage with a lot of the expanded lore, for better and for worse. With Halo 4, it's not a perfect game by any stretch, and it's got a lot of flaws. I still quite like it, though, I have to be honest. I agree with you, I like the gameplay. I think the guns, the shooting's solid, I think the movement's good. The enemy AI this is kind of what I was talking about with it de-evolving to an extent. The Bungie Halos were known for having very kind of say advanced, but very kind of good enemy AI, especially for the time, and that you had distinct enemies who all reacted differently. So for instance, like elites would try and would dodge your shots and duck and weave, while your grunts, who are the more kind of lower enemies, the kind of cannon fodder, if you were to take out an elite, they would scatter and flee in terror. So everything kind of worked together, and it added to the experience of Halo. The problem was by Halo 4, because there was a lot of focus being put into visuals, as with most games, people wanted really high quality visuals and fidelity and everything. That meant there was less processing power available to run kind of more complex AIs. So the AI did get dumbed down. Counters don't feel as good as they did in Bungie's trilogy. As well, a new faction was introduced here called the Prometheans, who aren't great, to be honest. The enemies don't look that good. The weapons aren't that good, but still can kill you really rapidly and make combat a bit unfair. And yeah, 343, I think, had a lot of problems with kind of coding those enemies and trying to get them to work, which kind of explains their kind of unsatisfactory state. But sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but going back to the kind of story of Halo 4, it's a game of two halves, not in like a first half and a second half, but there's two competing storylines. One I think is actually excellent, and the other one I think is very dull. So I don't know if do you want to explain the two storylines, or do you want me to go a bit more into it? Or
Yeah, I'm assuming you mean between Cortana and the Diadact. Those
You've
two
got it.
stories. Yep. I completely agree with you there. I think that the Cortana Master Chief storyline is fantastically done. Basically, to give a quick lore dump here. The idea is that if you have an artificial intelligence or AI in the Halo universe, they've got a shelf life of, I want to say 7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's 7 years. I'm no lore aficionado, as was proven in that previous episode.
Yeah, after 7 years, they start to kind of degrade and corrupt, and obviously because Master Chief has had Cortana with him for so long, she's starting to show these signs of like deviancy and trying to break away from her coding. It is really fascinating. One thing I will say that I love about 343 is their portrayal of Master Chief. I think he's a lot more human in these storylines. And don't get me wrong, I think because at the time that was kind of the character he had to have in the Bungie run. You had the kind of semi-mute protagonist where he would only speak if he needed to, and, it was like, we've got to finish the fight, giving their Covenant the bomb back, and all of this. Great impression. You had all of these bare bones aspects to the character, but with 343, they try to humanize the Spartans to show that they too are quite, they're suffering as well through all this like mental anguish, not obviously just getting punched in the face by a brute. It's like there's a lot more complexity behind that, and that is what I love. I love that storyline, and I love the characterization of Chief. What I don't love is the pretty much the setup for the new storyline, that of course being humanity against the Forerunners. And this all kicks off when Master Chief touches a rather, how to put this very family friendly, a suspicious ball in space, to which the ball bursts, and a man who clearly looks better with the mask on, honestly, put him in a dark room and put a paper bag over his head, a Forerunner called the Didact, who wants to blow up humanity because he's like the big bad evil. I totally agree with you. I feel as if it's just such a dull, just boring storyline. And what I hate most about it is just the fact that they turn Master Chief into this, to borrow a phrase from you, Adam, they turn him from like a cog in like the UNSC machine into the chosen one. I don't get it. What is your take on it?
Yeah, it as you say, it very much leaned more into that savior sort of a narrative. The Bungie games had that to an extent, but it wasn't the overriding narrative, as you say, it became in 343. I don't know if this was partially a natural kind of offshoot of the fact that they wanted to give Chief more personality, as you say, and they wanted him to show a bit more humanity, which I'm actually okay with, and I think they did it relatively well. Like, I think some of the dialogue between Chief and Cortana in this game is absolutely superb. Like, some of the best kind of, I don't know if storytelling is the right word, but the best kind of narrative, I think, in any of the Halo games is their sort of relationship in this game, and there's some amazing scenes between the two of them. But yeah, like, I don't know if, again, a natural offshoot of that will make him more of a savior, as you say, kind of transcending his kind of status. As much as he was an important cog, in the machine, he was still a cog, rather than, being the whole. I shouldn't have used a machine analogy because I don't know enough about engineering to begin to like say, but yeah, this elevation in status. So Yeah, I'm kind of in a mixed opinion of it too. And I just think as well, like, it's just the Didact is such a boring villain. It really, that whole storyline just falls flat because you just don't care. And I think, am I right in saying there's more, you can get to know more about the Didact through kind of terminal. As with ODST, there's these optional terminals, and they kind of tell you a bit more about the Didact, am I right in saying?
Absolutely. This is the main like sticking point for me personally as well. But it's the fact that in ODST at least they were optional and they told like a completely different story that served to, I mean, maybe it wasn't the best story, it's been a while since I've heard it, but you know, it was a story that fleshed out the world. Whereas 343 seemed to have gone down like the Disney Star Wars route, where it's like they have to include every single bit of like lore. Oh well, you know, we included this in the previous games, we have to include it in this game, especially for things like the Didact. It is just tedious. It's like getting extra homework, which, let's face it, you know, the kind of target demographic is teenagers, isn't it? You don't want to give them homework to like brush up and understand like a character's motives.
Is that not what teens are in? Teens aren't into homework now, are they? Well, they weren't into it in 2012.
According to the mainstream news, they're into avocado toast and thumbing off authority or something. I don't know.
Kids these days.
I know. Back in my day, we played Halo 3 and we liked it.
I do kind of feel sorry for 343. I was looking at some kind of stories behind the development of this game, and it does seem like they just got trapped in this way. They didn't feel they could break out of the kind of cage of what Halo was under Bungie and everything. And the best illustration of this is in one of the new enemy types in the Promethean Knights, who are kind of akin to the elites in a way. They're kind of enemies that are they're kind of the bigger enemies of the Prometheans, and they have swords and guns, kind of like the elites. And so this enemy design went through a ton of different kind of edits and re-edits, and they kept 343 designers kept running up against problems that, so yeah, they really struggled to reconcile the gameplay with the design and then with the existing lore. They'd kind of go down one avenue and be like, oh, this will be the design, but then it would run up against one of these problems, you know, and it feels like they were almost kind of handicapped in many ways when designing this. And I think a lot of the failings of Halo 4 and, you know, 343's later entries can be placed at that way, that I don't think they don't even have the courage, the want, or like the authority to kind of shelve a lot of the Halo lore, which I think would be a benefit to these games if they just ignored it, you know, and kind of went in a different direction. So I do feel that it is handicapped them. I do feel bad in that way, and it kind of has brought the quality down of their products.
The one thing I will say about 343, like you're about to hear me, you know, go on a rant like later on about 343, but overall, I do like admire them for trying something different. Don't get me wrong, I don't think they did it well at all, but I don't want to be the guy to, you know, sit here and just criticize someone else's work and be like, oh, it's terrible, haha, do better. Because, I mean, there must have been someone here who genuinely believed in this. I don't believe for a fact, well, I'll get on to Halo Infinite, but like for the most part, I don't believe that it was like 100% like a corporate, oh, let's just churn out like, you know, something out our backside. I do think they tried to incorporate the lore into the storytelling, but again, it's exactly what you said, there's just so much of it. See, reading like the extended lore, the Didact is actually portrayed as like this kind of Shakespearean villain who, you know, or tragic Shakespearean villain who is, you know, he's just trying to save his race from the flood, and he's like, yeah, let's turn our people into robots. Not my first choice personally, but okay. And, you know, he's trying to like go on this kind of noble cause, but it doesn't come across in the game. And that is the main issue here. It's not even about trying to say, oh, this is a bad villain. You know, at the end of the day, it's like they didn't flesh him out enough. And I remember I was watching a video talking about 343 as a whole and their villains. And one of the interesting things that they brought up was the fact that all of their main villains disappear. Have you noticed this? Like, they turn up at the beginning, have a very strong, powerful impact, and then they bugger off until the very end of the game when there's like the big showdown.
It's a really good point. I didn't know about that, but that is exactly what happens.
Yeah, because I genuinely didn't notice until like I watched this video and I'm like, holy shit, they're right. Because I mean, Halo 4, Didact, force chokes you, throws you through a wall, buggers off until the end where you have to have a quick time event. Still one of the worst decisions. I do not get why they did that. Then Halo 5, Cortana, she like turns up halfway through, buggers off, and then comes up at the end with the Guardians. Halo Infinite, Atriox, he pops up, he like bodies Chief, and then he's dead. And Escharum ends up like taunting you throughout the game as if he's like Dr. Claw. He's like,
I'll get you next time, Master Chief.
you're like, come on. Are you serious, 343? It feels as if it is like that Saturday morning cartoon territory with their villains, rather than this kind of grand scale military drama.
For a start, can I just say that impression just gave me chills
Yeah.
down my spine. I was frozen in fear for a minute. I was like, "Whoa." I thought the call had been hijacked
Yeah,
for a minute.
thank you.
I was getting threats. I do think they struggle. I think they actually do quite a good job for the most part in kind of humanizing and personifying the Chief.
Yeah.
That was done well by 343, and I do like what they did with Cortana in Halo 4. And I'll stress in Halo 4, I really like what they did with her character. But it does feel a lot of the other characters don't get that, and it baffles me as well why they built this kind of elaborate story for the Didact and then didn't bother to tell you any of it that might have helped flesh him out. And no, it's not even about making him more intimidating, it's just making him more, understandable and relatable and just a more interesting character. That was a weird choice.
And I'm going to give you like a quick lore dump here once again, so apologies. But according to the lore, and this is something that really, really irked me, where, and again, there'll be like Halo aficionados who can like either fact check out there or just say, no, Satsunami, you're talking rubbish. But there is like lore that humanity was progressing and they kind of became like this spacefaring race and they fought the Forerunners. And then all of a sudden, the Forerunners like kicked them down and reset their genome or something. And then humanity had to re-evolve again. And there's talk about the mantle of responsibility and all of this like prophecy things. So you're telling me they have the power for, genetic mutation and everything, but these are the same ones who got absolutely bet the you-know-what out by the Flood. This is one of the issues I have with like the villains as well. It's kind of like anime logic. For any anime fans out there, it's like having to have a biggerer and badderer enemy, and yes, I know they're not words, but bear with me. It's the fact that they have to have a bigger and badder enemy to fall back on. Oh, we fought the Covenant, who are these like genocidal zealots, which obviously, other than the alien part, they are a believable enemy. The Covenant are these religious zealots, and obviously all we have to do is look back in our own history to see that, this is kind of an archetype that could very well exist in this universe. Whereas for the Didact, he's just there. He's just this like, oh, woe is me, I'm going to compose whatever the hell that means. I'm going to compose all the humans. And it's like, okay, well, why? Why are you being such a dick, Didact? Why? Please. Then, of course, we get to Halo 5 with Cortana, and Cortana's like, I'm going to cause a genocide. And you're like, okay, why? Why, Cortana? It's like, oh, because humanity would be better if AIs ruled the world. And it's like, okay. And then, of course, you get the Banished, which I have to admit, I laughed at this when I was explaining the Banished to you as like these disposable soldiers of the Covenant who rebelled and everything, and you were like, I had no idea.
Context, damn it, 343. Give me some context.
I kid you not, I never played, and I think you're the same as well, like, we've never played Halo Wars 2, and we've got very limited experience with Halo Wars 1. Is that right in saying?
Yep. Never played 2, played 1 for an hour or two, I think.
And don't get me wrong, those are kind of interesting, like, spin-off games. They're not the best, but, it's cool what they did. But in Halo Wars 2, I actually had to watch the damn videos and the cutscenes to understand who the hell the Banished are. The Banished are never explained in Halo Infinite at all. They appear for 2 minutes, they blow up the UNSC Infinity. I will get to Adam, don't you worry. They're just there and, they're the big bad guys now. And it's like, but there's no context. And I'll go back to like a point I brought up in our very first episode together. There is actually a graph, or it used to be, on the 343 website for Halo 5, where it's like, if you want to understand this character, read the book. If you want to understand that character, play ODST. And it's like, you should not need to rely on external media. It's the same with Star Wars, or even like Star Trek, or, any like major sci-fi franchise. You shouldn't have to rely on the supplemental material to get the full story of a game. And that is something I think that Bungie did well. Even if you didn't understand the overall nuances of the story, at least you could kind of play them and go, aliens bad, stop aliens, got it. Whereas it's like, in this one, it's like, okay, who's Cortana, who's Blue Team, who's this or that? And I will get onto the UNSC Infinity, but before I go into that, yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, as I said, there is a real problem with context in 343, and I do agree. Like, I think engaging with the expanded lore, I think, was a mistake. To be honest, it's just so cluttered. The minute you, especially the minute you go down the Forerunner route, you're just, I don't know. To me, it's just, oh god, it's all so much. I can't handle it. I think that was a correct decision by Bungie to keep it at arm's length, and I think it was a mistake with 343 to do it. I say again, like, it's difficult with the 343 trilogy because I think overall I do like Halo 4. I like the relationship between Chief and Cortana. I like the gameplay overall. I think it plays well despite the kind of limitations in the enemy AI and the Prometheans not being a very good faction. I do overall like it. Halo 5, yeah, it is what it is. I'm sure we'll get into cover a bit more. And then I do like Infinite, as I said before. I actually really had a lot of fun with Infinite. But again, it's not because of Infinite's story. So I like its general theme, kind of a bit like Reach. I like its general theme, but like Infinite story is a bit, it's a bit meh and a bit kind of muddy and like, what's going on here? So again, I felt like, but the gameplay really elevated it for me. So the 343 trilogy is a funny one. It's, I don't know if I have a definite answer on it. Where I can kind of say with the Bungie one, I like it. I like the Bungie trilogy, plus Reach and ODST. I generally like it. I don't know quite what to make of the 343 one, to be honest.
Because it is a bit like this is a blast from the past. You'll remember this episode, but we did an episode like months and months ago about gameplay versus narrative. And first of all, great episode. Go check it out after this one.
Seconded.
Yep. But the fact remains that we asked like the very important question of, can you have a game that is like solely good with its gameplay? Can a game only survive with good gameplay but not a good story? And I think for the most part, probably there are examples. Like one of the ones you wanted to bring up, I remember, was it Tetris?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Tetris is the ultimate example of pure gameplay over story. Unless you're going to tell me there's a rich, deep Tetris lore that I'm not understanding, that is actually about the fall of the Soviet Union or something. But no, I think Tetris is the example, of gameplay carrying a whole experience.
Oh boy, do I have a wiki page for you. Nah, I'm only kidding. Yeah, like games like that, it's understandable. But with a game like Halo, where the lore has already been established, as it were, I think that's the problem. Nowadays, people do want that balance. They want like a relatively okay storyline, because I think that's where a lot of Call of Duty games kind of limp along, where although they don't have like a brilliant story, they have a serviceable story. Whereas I think with 343, it's something that I want to touch on as well is their art direction. And I know you have very strong opinions on this as well, Adam, but I feel as if much like the storytelling, the art design is very cluttered. Especially, I think the quintessential example is the development of the Master Chief. Now, if you look at his armour from the old games versus what he looks like in 4 and 5, he just looks disgusting in 4 and 5. One of my friends who is like an absolute Halo fanatic, he actually said that it looks like he's wearing a toilet seat over him in Halo 4. Like genuinely, I cannot unsee that.
So apt.
I cannot unsee that after looking at it. I'm like, oh my god, he's right. It's just so cluttered, so bitty. There's so much going on. And what I do appreciate is it seems as if they learned their lesson in Halo Infinite, where they kind of scaled it back. But I do think that, although we've talked about it in length in our Halo Infinite review, although I do like the way they kind of scale back their art direction into a more simplified story, simplified design, they kind of threw everything else that they built up under the bus. So the whole trilogy doesn't piece together, and whether that's because of course, development issues with the pandemic in 2020, or whether it's just like time crunches with like Halo 5 and everything. Well, we talk about Halo 5 in Infinite.
I feel we should. I mean, yeah, I feel we should. But just before you say, I think you've actually made a really good point there. It does feel like the 343 trilogy feels very disconnected, as in the way that the Bungie trilogy feels like a natural progression. It does feel like almost with Infinite, they kind of wanted to they were like, right, okay, even we know that 5 wasn't great. Let's just get rid of as much as we can.
It does feel weird, because it is like, for Halo Infinite, they definitely tried to like wash their hands of Halo 5, because let's face it, I would say personally Halo 5 is the worst out the trilogy. Like, it doesn't play as bad. Like, see, gameplay wise, again, 343 does a great job that way. But design-wise, story-wise, just everything falls flat for me.
I think it's one of the most unmemorable games I've ever played. When I was looking back at this topic, I was like, I'm going to have to watch stuff on Halo 5 because I honestly cannot remember anything about the story. I can't remember anything about the characters. Even the gameplay. I don't even remember having fun with the gameplay. Even looking back, I completely forgotten that they'd implemented some kind of weak squad mechanics
Oh yeah.
into the game, but like in such a poor implement. It's one of these like half baked, light kind of things. It's like, oh yeah, you can tell them to target a particular enemy and stuff. It's so basic cookie cutter. It's not even, if that was the direction they wanted. First of all, I think squad commands is a terrible idea in a Halo game because it kind of goes against what the game is like. This isn't Brothers in Arms or Star Wars Republic Commando, games that actually suit having that kind of squad control. Halo's not about that. So, but if you're gonna go down that route, then at least don't make it so bare bones and unimpactful on the game. You don't need to use it at all. But I said I'd completely forgotten that was in. The whole thing is just, I've played it. I know I've played it. I have the achievements to say that I've played it. It says that I've put time into it on my Xbox. I just have no memory of it.
Do you know what the worst thing for me was? See, going into Halo Infinite, I had to watch a video, because I wasn't going to play through Halo 5 again. No, bugger that. But I actually went back onto a YouTube video to see what I'd missed from Halo 5, and I kept thinking, why is it such a big deal that the UNSC Infinity was destroyed on Zeta Halo? I'm like, surely they could just send more, UNSC ships. I genuinely forgot that Cortana had wiped out the entire UNSC. And I was like, oh, that is like a major point. And you're like, oh how did I forget that? And it goes back to what you were saying, it's just so forgettable.
I don't even know if it's a bad game per se. It's that funny thing, like, I don't think I could point at it and say it's bad. It's just because I don't remember anything about it, and maybe that's worse. That might be a worse thing. It's so bland that it's just filtered through my brain, and my brain has been like, okay, there's no need to hold on to, and there's no need to retain any of this information. So, you know what? Maybe it is a terrible game. To leave so little an impact is probably a damning sign of the state of your game.
Well, it reminds me of like Gears of War 4 and 5. They're very similar games in terms of like, they came out, they were a thing. I don't remember much about them other than the fact that they actually exist in the franchise, and it kind of tried to reset everything, where it was like, oh no, there's like a Covenant Remnant. Oh no, the Covenant Remnant don't exist anymore. And then for Infinite, they had the Banished, who only appeared in a spin-off game, which I think was a bad move. Like, I get them trying to like create their own identity, and like 343 as a company, they want to distance themselves and be like, okay, we're not going to have the Covenant by having a splinter group of the Covenant. And you're like, this is just going to go wrong. And I honestly have not met a Halo fan that likes the idea of Cortana being the villain. Have you ever met a Halo fan that likes that twist?
Not that I can think of, certainly. It's an interesting idea, again, but I just don't think it's been implemented very well, and that's kind of the sin of it. It goes back to the ODST thing. I like the general idea, but if you're not going to do it well, then what's the point? It feels like that kind of shock value. It's like, oh, let's have a twist to be shocking. Oh no, now they're a bad person, and it's like, and then I feel like, again, it goes more into the lore, and we have to learn more about why. Like, oh, Cortana's a special AI and everything, and again, you're just getting more into lore and stuff, and it's just, I don't know. It's just not a fun thing to explore, in my opinion. So I kind of, as much as it's weird that Infinite does just seem to shelve a lot of the stuff, I'm kind of glad in a way, because I'm like, you know what, I can actually focus on having fun in this kind of sandbox game, as opposed to having to be like, oh, who's this again? Who's this team of people who've just randomly shown up? I think that's the big problem with Halo 5, is that you'll be able to have more opinion on this than me, because you played some of Spartan Ops.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What happened was, apparently one reason for the disconnect in these games is a lot of the people who led on the Halo 4 project left before Halo 5. So basically, the people who designed Spartan Ops and kind of made the story Spartan Ops got drafted in to helm the story and helm the project. And I think they brought a big focus on co-op into it. And this is why we now have, rather than having just clones of Master Chief, or the Arbiter and Elites and things like that, we now have quote unquote fully fleshed out characters who aren't fully fleshed out at all. But anyway, separate characters with names and different voice actors and apparently different specializations that don't actually matter in gameplay and stuff. And it's a real detriment to the game, because I don't know, it just removed a lot of that classic Halo DNA and just made the game very generic, which again just contributes to this whole feeling of it just being bland and forgettable.
Oh god, yeah. I keep forgetting that there are like different characters and like one of the things, like going back to kind of the villains of the piece, let's just say, I remember like if you play Spartan Ops or even just save yourself time, go onto YouTube and watch the cutscenes, there's like a whole story with the Spartan Fours, which again, this is I hate the Spartan Fours. Okay, I'm gonna touch on it, Adam. I'm sorry, but I've got to touch on it.
Go for it. You can only keep the bile in for so long.
Basically, to quickly explain, Spartans are super soldiers in Halo. Spartan 2s were soldiers that were, is it right in saying, kidnapped as kids? You know, there was that whole AJ side to the franchise.
Yeah.
They kidnapped kids, they cloned them, and then the clones died off, so it kind of covered the tracks of them. Anyway, not important. The point is, Spartan 2s and 3s had like these kind of tragic backstories, and there was like a weight to the sacrifice. And this is the thing, if you're going to have like a super soldier, you know, there's always going to be kind of this sacrifice and everything, and it just gave so much weight that when you saw a Spartan pop up, you're like, oh my god, you know, we've got the Spartans now that are appearing and trying to defend humanity as best they can. With Halo 4 and 5 and Infinite, they introduced a thing called Spartan Fours, which are basically just, I don't know, they're like just genetically enhanced, and it can really be anyone, can't it? It's just like, yeah, Uncle Jim, come over here, you're a Spartan now.
You were in a subpar game before, get over here, you're a Spartan 4 now.
I forgot Buck was a Spartan. Oh, ODST, what are you doing to us? Yeah, it's like everybody and their mother's a Spartan, and I have to admit, that is one of the things I did laugh at quite a lot when I was playing through Halo Infinite, because you see a lot of Spartans that are dead, and the banished, they turn around and they'll say, haha, we killed all the Spartans. And you're like, well, no, you killed the Spartan Fours. That's like killing Captain America from Wish.com. It's not exactly killing the Master Chief or, you know, Blue Team or any of the other Spartans that came before that actually did their job in the Covenant War. It just seems as if they were there for like a wish fulfillment, if that makes sense. You know, it was like, oh, we gotta like fill the gaps with Spartans, so here we go. As we were saying, they had this whole subplot with the Spartan Ops where they were hunting down the leader of the Covenant Remnant. Yeah, by the beginning of Halo 5, they just kill off the main villain, like the head of the Covenant Remnant, and that's it. Really no more Covenant other than like stragglers, and you're like, okay, okay, fair enough. You know, that's it. Like, they built up, I think this is a core issue, they can't stick to one concept. Like, I feel as if first they had the Didact, which, you know, do you want to know a fun fact about the Didact, Adam?
I always want to know fun facts about the Didact, you know me.
He did not die. He did not die in Halo 4. He died in a comic. Yep, he died in a comic. He did not die in the game, and that is the issue. It's like, okay, we're bored of the Didact. Where do we go from here? Oh, we've got Cortana. And then they go on to Halo Infinite. It's like, okay, we're bored of Cortana. Here's the Banished. And it jumps so much. It is terrible. And of course, we've got the Infinity as well, which is another, like, shower of rubbish. But before I go on to that, like, is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think there's anything really add to kind of to Halo 5. As much as there's things to not like in Halo 4, as I say, I still think overall it's a good game, and I just don't know quite what. Well, I do know a little bit what happened to Halo 5, but it's just such a shame that, you know, this once proud franchise was kind of reduced. And it's not even that it's a bad game, as I say, it's just that it's such unmemorable. It's just so passable and bland that you're like, ugh. This franchise that was once, you know, the first game that defined, you know, the FPS genre and revolutionized it. It's just now this bland copy and paste by the numbers affair, and it's just, that's actually more sad, to be honest, than if it's just, then I'd rather they'd almost tried something completely different and failed. You're like, well, at least they were trying to innovate. While here it's just like, it's just so bland. It's just a real shame.
In a way, I do appreciate the fact that they went back to the bare basics with Halo Infinite, but even then, I think maybe they devolved a bit too much with the story. Again, you can listen to our like full opinions on the game, but to kind of briefly summarise, it seems as if they're going for that bigger fish angle, where it's like, we've got the Forerunners, but before the Forerunners, there was the Precursors. See, I'm getting my names mixed up, Adam. You know, it's like, you've got the Forerunners, the Prometheans, and they're all the same, aren't they? They're just all like...
I'm sure there are some differences that somebody would be happy to tell you. That person is not me, though, so let's just say they're all the same.
But then you get people who are like, oh, but you've also got you've got the Flood, who are like the biggest bad of the entire Halo franchise. And then it's like, oh no, there's like an alien species like greater than the Flood. It's this always scaling on top of one another. You know, it's like, oh, we have to make it worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's like, at least with the Covenant, there was like various levels. Like, you had to deal with the elites mainly, then you had to deal with the brutes, then you had a kind of combination. It was like a nice mix compared to what came after, where you've got the Forerunners and all their, you know, problems. You've got Spartan Locke and his issues. And because this is the thing as well, I keep bringing this up saying I hate the UNSC Infinity and things like that. And you might be wondering, why do I hate like a spaceship? So to kind of briefly explain, after the Covenant War, it's established that humanity gets their hands on Forerunner technology. Do you remember how they get a hold of it? Did they order it off a space Amazon, or?
Yeah, sounds about right. I'm sure Jeff Bezos, the fourth, hooked them up with whatever they
Yeah,
need.
sounds about right, really. And yeah, they end up like slapping that onto their ships. No care in the world, they're just like, bonk, here we go. Every single time I hear about the UNSC Infinity, they always say things like, oh, she's the, you know, greatest ship in the entire, you know, fleet and everything. She's gonna take the fight to anybody. And other than one scene in Spartan Ops where it rams through a Covenant ship, it gets bodied every single time it's on screen. Halo 4, it crashes on Requiem. Halo 5, it runs from Cortana. Halo 6, it gets destroyed in under 4 minutes. And they really emphasize under 4 minutes. I explained this to you like off the recording, but it's basically like the story of David versus Goliath. And if you think of the UNSC like Goliath, it's been built up as this like, you know, mighty ship, this mighty being. And we never see that. We don't really see that in the story of David and Goliath. Much like the UNSC and in Halo, we don't actually see the Infinity doing much. Every time it's on screen, and much like Goliath, the only time you see him, like, you know, make an appearance in the story is when he gets shot in between the eyes by like a 6-year-old or something with a slingshot. And that's what the UNSC Infinity is like. It's like, it is just there to take a beating. And I don't know if someone just has a thing against spaceships or what it is, but it seems as if it's like a kind of thing with 343's storytelling where it's like, do you know what it reminds me of? You know those Saturday morning cartoons where you always get like a carnival episode and you get a dodgy guy who's like got a curtain and he's got like, you know, the 7 wonders of the world behind said curtain, and he's like, no, trust me, yeah, I've got like amazing things behind this curtain. And it's like, can we see these things? And he's like, no, but just trust me. It seems like whether it's the villains, whether it's the heroes, I feel as if that's a core issue. It's like they're telling you to trust them. It just doesn't pay off.
Yeah, like I think it is that thing. I think the Infinity is an unfortunate casualty of that, as you say, that desire to establish a bigger threat, and it does undercut, you know, its status as apparently elite ship, which it is just an unfortunate casualty of the plot in many ways. I really enjoyed Infinite. Again, not for the story, to be perfectly honest. Although I think the story starts well. I think it starts well, and I like the theme. I like the general theme of, you know, there's been this battle and humanity is lost and humanity is defeated. The Banisher triumph, but the Chief's back, and the Chief is the one who's going to, you know, is going to take the fight to the Banished and, you know, and lift humanity back up again. I like that general theme, you know, as much as it leans straight into that idea of the Chief as the savior. I like it. I'm okay with that because it brings back memories to me slightly of Halo 1, and not to the full extent, but it does bring back that. And I think the world as well is very reminiscent of the original Halo ring, so it's hitting all those nostalgia glands for me. But I really love the gameplay. I thought it was so fun, fluid, frenetic. It was challenging, but it felt fair, and I had a real blast doing it. The story, unfortunately, the story winds itself. It doesn't really go anywhere for a while, and then stuff happens, and you're just like, what? That seems like a big thing that has never been explained before. Or else you're like, what? This is supposed to be a big thing, but I don't get why. And then it just kind of ends, and you're like, oh, okay. It's just a shame it doesn't. The story can't sustain itself. But at least there's really strong gameplay in Infinite. I felt like so I could always return to the kind of sandbox world, just have fun, just charging around and listening to the grunts and all the hysterical stuff they were saying, and liberating camps and liberating human prisoners and everything. It was so much fun to play it that I think Infinite really could stand on that. It was a really strong leg for it to stand on, for as much as the narrative buckled as the game went on. Infinite kind of reminds me very much of 4 in a way that I think the gameplay of Infinite is a lot better than 4's, but it's that way of the gameplay is far stronger than the story. I don't think Infinite story is quite gets the levels of the Chief Cortana relationship. So the two of them are interesting ones. And you just got the awkward one that we don't talk about, Halo 5 in the middle there.
Poor Halo 5. In fact, no, not poor Halo 5. It should be ostracised.
No, it deserves it.
Rightfully so. One thing I do want to touch on just briefly before we finish up is the multiplayer aspect. So very briefly, see compared to like Bungie's run and 343's run, how do you think they've differed?
I'm going to be honest, I never really played any of the multiplayer in the Bungie run. I really can't talk about it at all. I played co-op. I played a lot of like co-op in Halo 1. I had a friend at school who also had an Xbox, and we played a lot of co-op there, and I have played some kind of local multiplayer of Halo, but I never really touched the online aspects of Halo 2 or Halo 3 or even stuff like Reach, so I honestly cannot say what they were like. I know people have a lot of fondness for them, and as well, I never touched the multiplayer for Halo 4 or 5. Infinite really has been the first Halo that I've really got into the multiplayer. I've liked it. I think progression is a little bit, is quite, I think progression is very grindy, and I don't so much like that aspect of it. I don't know. I think I much prefer games like Call of Duty and Battlefields for their multiplayer. And I don't know if I'm just a bit late to the Halo party. It's just, it doesn't grab me quite as much as those other ones do. But perhaps if I'd played it when I was younger, it might have. So again, I can't really say the differences are. I'm afraid you're probably a better authority than me on that.
As I said at the beginning, Halo 3 was the first game I played like online with my friends. While it wasn't my favourite online game, I think it was more the nostalgia aspect and the fact that I could go away and play with friends and things like that. And I absolutely loved it for that. And I loved being part of this kind of community, which, don't get me wrong, sounds like a cult in hindsight. I feel like, join us, Adam. Join us in the Halo 3 LAN party.
No!
At the same time, like, I loved Reach as well. I played a lot of Reach. While I do think the gameplay is better in the 343 games, I definitely have like a fondness of the Bungie games, like especially for Halo Reach. I played that game so much. I loved their progression system, the fact that you could earn tokens and things to unlock helmets, and then replay the campaign as like your ideal Spartan. I honestly loved aspects like that. I thought it was fantastically done. Although I have fun playing Halo Infinite, I think it's one of the most bitter disappointments ever. And the only reason I say that, like gameplay wise, completely fun, but the progression system is like disgustingly awful. Normally you'll know this, I'm very kind of reserved when I'm criticising things, but this is the only thing I'm taking the kid gloves off for. I genuinely think it's one of the worst things of all time. The fact that although it's free to play, they've got like this very, I don't want to say predatory, but like this progression system where they're like, oh, to get forward, you can buy these cat ears and you can, become, don't get me wrong, this isn't like a pay to win game. It's not as egregious as that, but it's the fact that Halo went from a game that felt like fun. You could just pop it on with your friends, you could kind of progress, maybe get a couple of tokens, and you could unlock like a cool helmet and everything. Nowadays, and I think this is more the state of gaming as a whole, I don't think Halo's like, the martyr and the crosshair for the way that gaming's kind of evolved, but I do think that it's disgusting that a game that is so prolific in carving the way for FPS games as a whole has all of a sudden turned into this game of, if you want to buy, your childhood helmet, you have to sink your mother's credit card into it, which I just find it a bitter disappointment. And I know that's kind of off tangent, but I don't see how a game like Halo Infinite, which is already fun as hell, has a worse progression system than something like Halo Reach, which came out 11 years prior. I just don't get it. Like, I get it, why money, but it just leaves a bit of a sour taste. And I don't want to end the episode to be like, like a very depressing Halo Reach moment where it's like just our helmets lying on the ground and we're just looking up at the sky, but I find that bitterly disappointing.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Don't think you're alone from what I've seen. As I said, the progression does seem, say, broken, but it does seem very much, I don't know, it kind of puts me off playing a lot. I'm kind of like, I don't feel like I'm making any progress with it at all. So it's a real shame that that's the way they decided to go with it. Whether that gets changed, we'll see. Who knows? Maybe a year's time, we can look back and be like, "Oh, no, it's in a much better state now than it is." Gameplay wise, I've had fun in the matches. I did have fun playing it and everything, but it is a shame that it does have that kind of very big black mark on it currently. So hopefully they'll change it, but we'll just have to see, I guess.
So, as a wrapping up point, how do you see Halo progressing from now on? Are you quite optimistic, would you say, about the franchise? Would you say that it's heading in more a positive direction?
I think I'll speak mainly on the single player here because that's what I'm most familiar with. I like the direction it went in Infinite gameplay wise. I think the open world was a really good idea. I think that the mechanics they added in to help you traverse that open world and in combat were excellent. So I think if 343 they keep moving that direction with the Halo campaign, I think they're on pretty good footing. Story-wise, again, I never thought Halo has been that good at storytelling, whether it be Bungie or 343. I think Bungie just made it simpler, which made it a bit better. I don't know. I don't have much hope for 343 storytelling, but if the gameplay is fun and it's fun and it's a good world to explore, and and the combat remains satisfying, I can forgive the kind of weak storytelling and the reliance on the extended lore. I'm slightly optimistic. Halo 5 is not that long ago that I don't. Ironically, Halo 5 is not that long ago that I can't forget it as much as I can forget. I have forgotten all the important details of it, so that does stick in the back of your mind. Like, oh god, we could have another one of those on our hands. But I'll stay slightly optimistic because I do think Halo Infinite was a strong single player entry. Multiplayer wise, I don't know. It kind of feels like maybe this might be the direction of multiplayer, but hopefully not.
As I said before, I think that the single player is definitely going in the right direction. Maybe, again, the storytelling isn't the best, but I do think that the gameplay is its strongest hand right now. I don't think that they need to improve on the gameplay, but what they do need to improve on is not only their attitude towards their multiplayer side, but really just how they're going to progress from now on. And I think at the end of the day, we can only just be hopeful, can't we?
That's all we can do. I say, for me, it's a funny one because as much as I'm a huge fan of the first Halo game, I'm not sure how much of a fan I am of the rest of the series. So it's a weird one for me. I kind of feel like I've become a bit more of a fan with Infinite. It's kind of restarted my love for the series. Just for me, it's as a closing point for me. Just as much as I say Halo Combat Evolved is, I think, is a really important game in gaming history. For me as well, it's the most important game in my kind of gaming life. It's the game that it made me an Xbox devotee. I still have Xbox consoles, I think largely because of the original Halo. It made me a fan of first-person shooters, which is still my favorite genre, and the genre most games I play are from first-person shooters, so it's responsible for that. And most importantly as well, I think it just made me a fan of gaming. It ensured that I would, stick with this passion, and here I am now on a podcast talking about video games. So Halo Combat Evolved, I think it generally has a large part to play in that. So it's such an important game for me. As much as I may not be the biggest fan of the rest of the series, I will always be a fan of Combat Evolved. I will always laud it as a masterpiece, and it'll always be one of my favorite games.
It just reminds me of that scene from Starship Troopers where it's like, welcome to the Halo community. Playing Halo made me the man I am today. And he just wades through a sea of salt, just coming towards you. And you're like, oh no. I would agree. I think that for me as well, Halo is one of those games that while it's not the best, I wouldn't say it's the best franchise of all time, but it would be criminal to kind of understate not only its importance in gaming as a whole, but also how much it means to the both of us really, and how it has shaped our gaming lives. And don't get me wrong, I can't be overly critical in something like 343 or Bungie or whoever, because you and I and our mutual friends, we have all played these games on stream. We're hoping to play Halo 5 sometime, and it has given us that experience, which is all you can ask for nowadays, because in this kind of world where gaming has become this corporate, I don't want to be like very hippy dippy and be like your corporate think tanks where it's like, how are we going to squeeze the most money out of people? Those like small moments that you can share with your friends, and especially for a game like Halo, I think is what makes Halo. It's really the community and what comes out of that. So whether it's, you know, the machinimas, the videos, the fan edits, or even just streaming with a couple of friends, I think that's what makes Halo Halo. You know, none of this rubbish about, oh, we need a battle royale mode or we need like more terminals. No, we just need Halo as it is. And yeah, at the end of the day, that's all you can ask for.
It is true. It's all we want. Make it fun.
And yeah, seeing that note, I think that's the perfect place to leave it. So as always, thank you so much for joining me and waxing lyrical on Halo once again.
My pleasure. I'm always up for telling you why Halo Combat Evolved is one of the best games of all time. So thank you for giving me the platform. And it was really fun to look back at this series and, you know, to reminisce on it, but also to learn some things I didn't know about it. Kind of put it in context. Yeah, C343. They take a context is important. See, remember. But yeah, no, it was fun to do that. So thank you for suggesting it, and my pleasure always to be here.
And of course, on that note, that wraps up our episodes on Halo Month, and what a journey it has been. If you want to check out our previous episodes on Halo, we have a Halo retrospective, of course, which was our very first episode together. So if you want to hear like how our views have evolved over the years, over the year. In fact, no, over 2 years nearly.
My God, it isn't here.
Because we did record that episode in 2020. So yeah, technically it's 2 years.
Year and a half,
year and a smidgen. If you want to hear more of our Halo Month content, you can listen to our Halo Infinite review, our Halo Trivia quiz, and last but not least, our take on Halo Legends, which was a fun episode to do. Thank you all so much, as always, for listening to this episode, and you know what's coming next. Stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.